All right, hey everyone, and welcome back to another video. I've been lucky enough just to win a contest the other week to qualify through to the first World Longboard Tour event this year.
Down the barrels, Benny.
At Bells Beach, which is my home break. Super excited for this. In the qualifying event, there were some really tricky conditions, and I think the nuances of catching the right wave was something that was really important.
Dropping down.
So on the back of that, what I wanted to do today is to discuss with you guys what it requires to catch the right wave when we're out in the water. Now, this is something that I call a surfing soft skill, and there's lots of nuances and lots of different pieces that come together to add into this. So I think this will be really good to delve into today. Now, we're going to focus on 3 different areas for this today. We're going to be focusing on what we can do from the beach and assessing the conditions, what we can do once we're out in the lineup, and then also some action tips. And we're going to move through this both with some whiteboard breakdown as well as some assessment of the clips from the contest as well.
Go, dude.
Oh, that's super.
And that was so cheeky by Ben Considine.
A bunch of this stuff is some ways of thinking about things and approaching this that I haven't necessarily seen on any other sort of tutorial breakdowns. So it'll be really good to delve into this today. And if you are new here, my name's Ben Considine and I'm a professional longboarder, a longboard enthusiast and a longboard coach. And I'm here to share my learnings and experiences like these ones today with you all. So if you do find the video useful, if you find it valuable, then please feel free to subscribe. And if you know of anyone else who might find it useful as well, then feel free to share it with them. But let's get straight into the edit. All right, so to kick this off, we're going to be breaking through the 3 different sections today and talking about the surfing soft skills of how to catch the right wave and doing a bit of whiteboard breakdown. So I'm going to be drawing through and discussing a few different topics here. And of course, we're going to start off with our beach observations, so looking into the lineup from the beach. And I'm just going to share with you everything that's helped me in terms of what I'm looking for. I think it's really important to make sure we're establishing each of these and doing this before we get out into the lineup. So the first thing that we're going to discuss is going to be following the crowd. And this one is a little bit of a controversial one. But follow the crowd is essentially important for a few different reasons. Now, the first one is actually going to be that when we follow the crowd, of course, we know that we're more likely to be going where the best waves are. And something that I see a lot of surfers starting out doing, and for fair reason, is they will prevent themselves from going out, or they'll stop themselves from going out where the crowd is because they don't feel confident being out in the lineup with a lot of people, which is very fair. And then they don't feel confident that in the crowded lineup, they'll be able to position themselves correctly, and it will just be a little bit confronting for them in that way. But we do know that this is where the best waves are going to be, okay? And so it's just a fact of the matter that where the crowd is, the better waves will be. And so the first thing that we're doing when we rock up to the beach is we might be seeing where the crowds are. Have a look at some of the other peaks, because maybe I'm wrong and there are some other peaks, especially at a beach break, that are going okay. But more likely than not, the crowd is going to indicate where the best waves are. And at least have a look at the waves around that area to see how they're comparing to the other peaks that may be there. Now, some things, because we may be a bit hesitant to go out into the lineup where the crowd is, there's a couple of things that can help here. The first thing is going out with our friends, okay? And if we are able to go out with our friends, and maybe the friends are a little more confident with establishing position in the lineup and with catching waves, that can be a fantastic way for you to actually improve your own positioning, because they may actually take you out there, show you where to position. They might help you feel more confident asserting your position within the lineup as well. And this can be a really good thing. Now, if you don't have friends out in the lineup with you, that's okay. I still think it's really important to make sure that we do follow the crowd, at least in some scenarios, because it's a great learning tool. What we want to be doing at the very least is sitting and observing. And the benefits of this is when we do this when we do observe our experienced surfers, we can pick up on some of the really important nuances with where they're positioning, gives us more confidence. If we see it repeatedly, we'll be able to learn about how they are positioning for their waves, how they're positioning in the lineup, when they're paddling, and different techniques in that sort of way. So although it can be confronting and a little bit daunting to go out where a crowded lineup is, it is really important for our development. Now, the second thing that we're going to be discussing is the wave direction. This is fairly obvious, but I do think it's still important for us to consider. So the wave direction, of course, this is either going to be right or it's going to be left. Okay, and there might be a bit of both out there. So you might be noticing there's some rights coming out, there's some lefts coming out. If it's a point break, it's a lot more easy to tell. But what I'd say here is make sure you are identifying what direction the wave is going. There's a few things that can stand in our way here, particularly for if we are really used to surfing in our forehand and there's some backhand waves coming through. So for my example, I'm always looking for lefts, but I need to make sure that I am on the eye out for right-handers as well. And this is really important for our skill development, being on the best wave. If we're a little bit too picky with making sure we're always on our forehand, it's not best for our development and it does limit us a lot in terms of the potentially good waves that we can be getting. So another part that can come into this, I would say, is skill on our backhand. So making sure that we do prioritize at some point in our development, learning and feeling really comfortable surfing in our backhand, or at least being prepared to dive into our progression in that sort of way, can be really, really important there too. Now, we spoke a little bit about the watching where the crowd is. But on top of that, I do also just like to consider our surfer observation. In terms of surfer observation, we know of course that where there's more surfers, there's likely to be better waves breaking, but we don't want to take that for granted. It's worthwhile watching for a little bit and seeing where the better surfers or the surfers who are catching the best waves, where they're sitting. It may be that they've actually dissociated themselves a little bit from the pack because the pack's been drawn out a little bit too wide or deep or whatever that may be. And so if there's consistent surfers who are getting the better waves, then this is a really, really important thing to be noting because this could help you out in the lineup as well. So note where the better surfers sit. Okay, and try to line that up, and that probably comes into a really nice last point that I like to look at from a surfer observation. And you've heard this before, but there's a few good things we'll talk about here today, and this is our markers. So for our markers, we need a couple of things. So if we found where the point is we want to be at the beach, when we're on the beach looking out into the lineup, we want to make sure when we're out in the lineup that we can actually see where we were wanting to be. So the markers, we need to make sure that this isn't something that's going to move. Don't pick a person on the beach, don't pick a dog or anything like that. We want it to be something stationary, like a house, like a tree, like a light pole or something like that. And this will give us a good indication of how far across the beach we want to be. And then we can actually make sure that we're looking at where these better surfers are and line them up with where a good on-beach marker is, and then we can go from there. So that's a couple of things with regards to the on-beach analysis. This was really, really tricky to do for me for the qualifying contest because the waves were so messy. It was really tricky to see anything that was worth surfing. The waves were big and crumbly and closing out, and it was really, really tricky. I tried to pick some of the markers. I had a marker to the right of the stairs where the contest was being held, so I knew exactly around about where I wanted to be positioned. And something that was happening, because it was very messy conditions this day, is people were getting swept way too far down, and that happened in our heats. And so what I was able to do then is know where my marker was, get back to the peak, and I was able to get some really good rides. But that being said, it was tricky to see where the best waves were. I like to think that our beach observation is our general look. It's our general observation, and we can get a lot more nuanced with this with our out the back observation. So let's get into that now. Okay, so if we now move into our in-water review. So we're out the back and we're looking at the waves and trying to figure out, all right, how am I going to catch the best wave? There's a few really, really important things that we want to be covering here. Let's touch on what we spoke about or what we finished with the beach observation, which is our markers. Now, from a markers perspective, oftentimes I like to draw this out as a bit of a graph so that we can think about what directions we're actually looking to hold ourselves in. So for markers here, I like to make sure that we're considering this in our Y and X axes. So if we do a little graph here, all right, and we've got our Y axis and we've got our X axis. Now, what we're usually really good at is finding our marker along this x-axis, okay? So we've said that there's a little house on the beach here, a great little drawing, and this is where the best waves are coming through, and so we want to be somewhere out in the lineup where that house was. Now, this is all well and good, and this gives us a really good idea of where we want to be, but there are times where we may want to make sure that we're actually a certain distance out in the lineup as well, which is something that is a lot trickier. If you've seen the latest video from longboard sessions from Brian, there's a really good point where if you're trying to see that you're in the right position on the lineup with regards to this y-axis, then what we can do, if there's something like a jetty or something like that out in the lineup, you can pick a point on that jetty and you can say, okay, this is where I want to be. But there's not always an object or a landmark to be able to consider this against. Something that I've heard very recently from my mate Sam, so Sammy boy, if you're watching, thanks very much, is for this house, for example, if this was, behind the dunes or something like that on the beach, we can actually try and pick out how much of this house we can see. So maybe it's that if we can't see the house, that we're not far enough out. If we can see the whole house, then we're too far out, but if we can see just enough, if we can just see the top of that house, for example, top of a tree, then this is a really good way to know that we're actually in the right position on the lineup. This is something I hadn't heard before, and I actually really like it. It's not a perfect scenario, but it's probably one of the best ways I've heard of to see and make sure that we're out far enough in the lineup, because otherwise, especially in the messy conditions like it was on the weekend, it can be really tricky to pick our direction on this y-axis of where we want to be sitting. So that's getting a little messy, but what we can essentially do is we can use, for our x-axis, we can see where we want to be with regards to what's on the beach, and with our y-axis, we can see where we want to be with regards to either a landmark like a pier or a jetty or something like that, that can bring us into this position, or have a look at how much of that marker on the beach that we can actually see. It's a really good way to go about things. All right, so moving on from there, we're going to talk a little bit about wave selection. So if I just get rid of this for a second. So now that we've figured out exactly where to position ourselves, both with respect to that Y and X axis, I like to think about our wave selection. So specifically, I wanted to speak around making sure that we're not catching closeouts, which is easier said than done. But when we're catching waves at the start, I often find that we are catching closeouts just because we're not exactly sure what to be looking for. I like to use the analogy in terms of what we're looking for as the almond shaped wave. So I can picture an almond might look something like this. If you get rid of that bottom of the almond, then what we're looking for is something with an apex or a tall point, and then it actually drifts off and curves into and tapers down. Now, in our minds, we may think, cool, yep, I understand that, and I can see that from the beach, and it's much easier to see from the beach because this is how we draw it from the beach perspective. But when we're out on a lineup, it can be a little bit trickier to actually identify that. What I often see people doing is they will see a wave that's pretty obvious, and it's standing up nice and tall, which we're actually going to speak about in the next section, why that's a problem. And what we can see is we think, cool, it looks like down the line it's not as tall, so we're going to catch that wave. But because of where they're positioned, potentially that taper drifts off a little bit too long and they get caught in too deep. And so that wave, if you don't mind my terrible drawing here, they get caught in the white water of that wave and the wave just continues down the line here. So to solve for this, I do think it's really important to actually look for a really strong taper. This is something I had to do on the weekend lots because most of the waves were closing out and I needed to identify anything that would give me the opportunity for being on the wall. And I think this is good practice for, beginner to intermediate surfers as well, looking for something with a really strong taper. So that will look like they've got the apex here, and then it does come down and actually that wall tapers off pretty quickly. Now this is going to be good for a few different reasons, because if we're a little bit slow getting to our feet and we usually take a bit of a downward angle first and then we turn and go across here, if we've got a faster wave, or a wave that's breaking faster, so therefore the wall is going to be longer, then it's going to be really difficult for us to keep up with that wave. If we've got a pretty strong taper here, then what will happen is the wave won't rush up so quickly, so we're more likely to be able to get to the wall of that wave. And what will happen here as well is we need to be really specific about our takeoff position, because obviously if we're taking off here, we're not going to catch that wave. We're going to be too far across the side of the wall there. It's going to be too flat. So what we'll need to do is we're going to improve our positioning by being closer to the peak, which is something that is a skill in and of itself. We're going to be therefore practicing getting into the right position, and therefore we're going to get more out of the waves as well if we're able to get onto that wall. So that is a really, really good thing that I like to think about. So looking for a really strong taper, which I'll write here. I'll move this guy out of the way. Strong taper. And the next part of this that I wanted to talk about was the identification problem, which kind of goes part and parcel with this as well. So the identification problem. Now, the identification problem, what this is a lot of the time when we're starting out surfing as well, we look for waves that are already very, very tall. And this is because it's easier to see this wave. So potentially if we see a smaller lump that we don't think is going to break quickly enough, then we might just leave it to pass by. Unfortunately, similar to what we found in that previous scenario with the strong taper, when we go to look for a wave that's really tall, especially in the early stages, if we don't know how to pace our paddling and if we're not looking behind to see when it's going to be breaking, then oftentimes what happens is we catch it when it's too steep, and this becomes a barrier for us catching the right waves as well. May not be that it's not the right wave, but we can't utilize that wave because either we nosedive, we get crushed down on, so we need to make sure that our positioning is really, really good. On top of looking for the strong taper, I'd say try and attempt paddling for waves that look like they have a moderate steepness to it. It doesn't need to be super obvious and it doesn't need to be a vertical wave. This will help us learn to paddle into waves a little bit earlier, which is going to be fantastic because it's an easier entry into the wave from the perspective of not nosediving. It'll really improve our wave selection from not always looking for waves that are super steep and tall. We can catch waves, and oftentimes it's better to catch waves before they're super steep. So if this is a problem you've found, you're getting waves that are breaking on top of you when you're paddling for them, and you're not finding yourself in the right position, these two things, so the wave selection as well as the identification problem, in which I'd say here, just making sure that you're catching waves of a moderate steepness. This can really, really help. And on top of this, the last part that I will say here is patience when we're trying to catch the best waves possible is key. A lot of the times what we'll see for beginner surfers, beginner to intermediate surfers, is they'll catch lots and lots and lots of waves. And this means that, say there's not a lot of good waves coming out in that session, it's unlikely that they're going to be in the right position for that. You might notice this with really competent surfers as well. They're out in the lineup and they're actually waiting and sitting still until the right waves come. I see that in the surfers that I certainly look up to. They're very, very selective and they're always on the best waves. And this is something that I'm trying to improve on, but I think all of us can improve on to some extent as well. So being patient out in the lineup, not thinking that every wave is a must. This can be a big step up for what we're looking to do with regards to catching the best waves in conjunction with some of these other things that we've been speaking about. And the last little tip there that I suppose I haven't written down here, but my assessment for the wave as I'm paddling in doesn't stop once I start paddling. I'm paddling into the wave, and as that wave picks me up, I'm still looking down the line, down the shoulder to see, is this the right wave? Do I need to pull out of this one because now it looks like it's going to break? So we've always got to make sure we have a real-time assessment of what the wave's doing, how the wave's breaking and reacting to that. And of course, being patient. So being prepared to say no to waves that aren't going to give us the ability to do what we want to do on the wave and to ride it the way that we want to. All right, so we've spoken here about some of the soft skills. So some of the really intricate things that come into selecting the right wave. And I think one of the most important parts of this is to understand some of those, the action steps. So what we need to be doing to make this happen for us out in the lineup as well. So what we can actually do once we're out there. Now, the first thing, like we spoke about just then, is of course going to be saying no to waves. So get really, really used to not catching every wave. And I know this is easier said than done, especially in the early stages, but this is definitely a big tip for people who are looking to progress to that next level. If we can say no to waves, we're going to be practicing our wave selection much more rather than saying yes to everything. We're going to get a good look and better repetition at saying this wave looks right, this wave looks wrong, and what we're actually looking to find out in the lineup. So that is a big one. The second one here, and again, a fantastic one that was mentioned briefly in Brian Longboard Sessions' latest video, is hunting spot X. Now, when we say hunting spot X, what we're referring to is we're actually being really active out in the lineup. So say that this is the beach. Again, let's do our X and Y axis here. So this is out in the lineup, and this is along here. And say we've got a beach break type conditions where we're not sure where the waves are. They keep moving around a little bit. Instead of having our house and then we're lining up exactly from there, and we want to see half of that house, so we're this far out. What we actually want to be doing is not just sitting and staying put here, not expecting that the waves are going to be coming to us, which a lot of the time they won't. We can't be really, we can't just be sitting still in the lineup. We need to be hunting, we need to be active. By hunting, what do we mean by that? If we see a peak that's coming in from over to the right here, what we want to be doing is we want to be translating ourselves over to that position. And if we notice that the wave might be really, really tall and breaking soon, then what we actually want to do is we want to paddle out and across to it. We don't just want to stay within that horizontal path, because again, we could run into the place where we have the right wave in front of us, but we're too deep, or the wave is too tall. We want to make sure we're always looking to either paddle out or paddle across to find waves. And early identification for the waves, which is that next point that I wanted to cover, is going to be really, really important. So we're also looking for our early identification. Well, that's terrible. Hopefully you can read this still. All right, terrible writing, but you get the point. Now, the other skills that can be required here is going to be how we actually utilize the wave once we're on it. Because say we've identified the right wave and we're catching that wave, all is well there, but we have a slow pop-up, or we actually find that we come down to the bottom of the wave at the start. So this is something that we see quite often. If we see our wave face here, and what we do once we pop up here is we drive down to the bottom, and then we start to turn from here. This is a good way to lose a lot of our speed. What we ideally want to do is popping up at the top of the wave, and we're actually turning as we ride down the wave face so that we can keep the wave's speed. So making sure we have a good pop-up, utilizing the tail and engaging that turn early, popping up at the top of the wave, all really, really important things to make sure we're not missing our down the line section, and that we actually catch the best waves and make the most of those better waves as well. And this was all a bunch of stuff that I was consistently doing on the weekend for the qualification contest as well. So I was consistently on the move. I was paddling around left, right and center, trying to find the right peak, but always keeping my marker in mind as to where I was positioned. So not drifting too much from that, but being prepared to paddle out to waves, to paddle in, paddle across, being really, really active. As a last little point as well, just as a side note and as a bonus tip, when you're more active in the lineup and you're actively seeking out waves, you will actually be able to hold your position in the lineup better. People, you'll often notice, will paddle around you if you are sitting still and you don't look like you're actively trying to find the waves. And this is because they may think that you're being dragged out of position, which you may be, and they just don't think that you're asserting yourself within that lineup. This is neither right or wrong. I don't necessarily promote that, but it is what you'll find out in the lineup. But if you can make sure that you're actually paddling towards the waves and trying to hold your position, make sure you're not drifting out of position, this is going to be a really, really good way to reinforce your position in the lineup. When you are going out to the crowded waves or a lineup or a peak that has lots of people on it, this is going to be a great way to assert yourself within that kind of ecosystem and make sure that people aren't paddling around you and taking advantage of the fact that they don't think you're sitting in the right place. So just a little tip there. Now, I'd love to know what you think of the whiteboard breakdown here, if you find that helpful, being able to visualize things alongside the edits as well. Something that I think is a good way to demonstrate things and just to kind of articulate what's in my mind. So let me know what you think of that. Couple of other little things. Obviously, super stoked that I'll be in the first stop of the World Longboard Tour this year at Bells. really excited for that one. It was definitely a big goal of mine, put a lot of things in to practice to make sure that I got the result there that I needed to so that I qualified. So I'm actually going to be doing that contest, and then I'm heading away to Europe and South America for about 5 to 6 months to travel, get some waves and have a bunch of fun there. So big year lined up. I want to thank everyone for your support so far. Hopefully we can get a good result at Bells. I'm definitely training hard for that at the moment and can't wait to get things started there. And yeah, really, really excited. Thanks so much for the support. Hopefully you found this useful. If you want to see more of the whiteboard breakdown videos, then let me know, and let me know if there's any topics that you want me to cover as well. Really stoked to get into those for you too. Once again, thanks so much, and we'll catch you on the next one. Phew.